Have you ever felt that something is missing, even when everything seems to be fine? A sense of emptiness that stays despite your accomplishments, relationships, and daily routines. This feeling is more common than you think, and it's often a silent indicator that something within us needs attention. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate emotional resilience and clarity. But how often do we really evaluate our emotional health? In our fast-paced lives, we might overlook subtle signs that our inner world is out of balance. Emotional well-being isn't just about avoiding sadness or stress. It's about understanding and nurturing our deeper needs. In this video, we will dig out 4 hidden but crucial indicators that you might be ignoring your emotional needs. Usually, such signs are hidden from us, but in their subtlety, they possess great power over our lives. Once detected, these signs will enlighten you about your mind, making you more like a harmonious and aware Stoic. Imagine a life where you are not just surviving, but thriving. A life where you understand yourself deeply and respond to challenges with calmness and purpose. That's what awaits when you start paying attention to these hidden signals. Stay with us as we explore these 4 signs and learn how identifying them can transform your approach to life. By the end of this video, you'll not only know these signs, but also understand how to address them, empowering yourself to lead a more balanced and fulfilling existence. Emotional neglect is the act of ignoring or dismissing one's emotional needs, either consciously or unconsciously. It often stems from societal expectations, personal habits, or a lack of awareness. While it might seem harmless at first, the consequences of emotional neglect can be profound, rippling through our mental and physical well-being. Over time, unacknowledged emotions can manifest as stress, anxiety, or even physical ailments, leaving us feeling disconnected from ourselves and others. When emotions are ignored, they don't simply disappear. Instead, they linger beneath the surface, subtly influencing our thoughts, actions, and relationships. This can lead to a perpetual feeling of emptiness or dissatisfaction, even when everything appears fine on the outside. Emotional neglect creates a void that undermines our ability to experience genuine joy and fulfillment, leaving us vulnerable to burnout, strained relationships, and a diminished sense of purpose. From the Stoic perspective, emotional neglect is a big hindrance to achieving inner peace and harmony. Stoicism encourages us to develop emotional awareness by looking into our thoughts and feelings without judgment. The philosophy doesn't advocate suppressing emotions, but rather understanding and aligning them with reason. This helps people live life in a clear and purposeful way, bringing balance into their inner world. By embracing emotional awareness, Stoicism offers a framework to recognize and address neglected emotional needs. It teaches us that emotions are not enemies to be vanquished, but signals to be understood. When we identify and honor these signals, we align ourselves with nature's design, leading to a more fulfilling existence. Understanding emotional neglect and its effects is the first step towards transformation. As we proceed, you will learn how Stoicism provides practical knowledge in solving this problem so that you can regain control over your emotional health and lead a life of more balance and meaning. Constant discontent is a subtle but pervasive feeling that can persist even when external circumstances appear ideal. You might have a stable job, supportive relationships, and access to life's comforts, yet feel a nagging dissatisfaction that you can't quite explain. This discontent often stems from unmet emotional needs or an over-reliance on external factors to define happiness. For Stoics, this feeling happens when things are given much emphasis which are beyond one's power. The Stoics think that real satisfaction lies within the control of desires we have for what we may influence. They think these external circumstances like wealth or recognition or even relationships fluctuate and cannot be ascertained. According to them, our happiness hungers for those things. Imagine a person who works relentlessly to achieve a promotion in the belief that it would bring lasting satisfaction. With the goal accomplished, she may experience a short period of fulfillment, but this is followed by a renewal of discontent. This process repeats because the source of the dissatisfaction, their emotional disconnection or unmet internal needs, remains unaddressed. This dilemma, Stoics give us a very practical remedy by advising to look inwards instead of seeking validation from outside sources. Instead of going about seeking validation, they would have us cultivate virtues like wisdom, courage, and self-control. All of these are within our power and can be established to provide a stable base for lasting fulfillment. We read on that Marcus Aurelius, himself one of the most significant rulers in world history, often reminded himself that in the eyes of nature, any external achievement would soon cease to be his. A reminder to seek satisfaction simply in doing duties well, rather than in a successful accomplishment of them, enabled him, despite all those uncertainties to which life subjected him. In today's world, this Stoic principle remains applicable. If you experience discontent despite outward success, stop and reflect on what you want. Are you seeking things that are not within your control? Is it validation or fulfillment in the external world? Having identified these patterns, one can begin to realign their focus, prioritizing inner growth over external gain. Another modern example is social media validation. People often measure their self-worth by likes and comments, which puts one in a cycle of highs that last for minutes but leave dissatisfaction lingering on for hours. A Stoic approach would be to detach from these external metrics and find value in the act of self-expression itself, independent of how other people react. Constant discontent is a strong indication that something within us requires attention. With the help of the Stoic practice of aligning desires with what is in our control, we can break the cycle, develop emotional resilience, and achieve true contentment that stems from within. Suppression is the usual response to emotional pain. A lot of people bottle it up, assuming that when ignored, such feelings would go away. This would offer temporary reprieve. However, the emotions that are suppressed never really go away. They stay underneath, affecting one's thought, behavior, and even relationships in little but subtle ways. Time will show how this can lead to stress, anxiety, or even physical issues as the cycle gets vicious on emotional neglect. Stoicism is refreshing in its perspective on emotions. Contrary to the misconception that Stoics advocate for emotional suppression, they actually emphasize the importance of acknowledging and understanding emotions. The key is not to deny feelings, but to redirect them constructively through reason and reflection. This way, we prevent emotions from controlling us and instead use them as tools for growth and self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, would often muse upon the nature of emotions and how to manage them. He was convinced that feelings arise from judgments of us about the event itself, not the event. When some person says harsh things, the anger is not his words, but our thinking. It was intended to insult. Thus, if we make a choice in thought, we can alter the angle to which we look, consequently, our emotional response. One of the techniques Marcus used was that he paused and reflected over his emotions before acting. He would ask himself, is this within my control? And what harm will this emotion do to my peace of mind? This way, he could distance himself from impulse and respond with clarity and purpose. Another prominent Stoic philosopher, Seneca, stressed the value of premeditatio malorum, which means anticipating potential challenges and preparing emotionally for them. If we can imagine worst-case scenarios in advance, we can desensitize ourselves to fear and anxiety and make it easier to stay composed when difficulties arise. This practice is especially useful in managing suppressed emotions, as it encourages proactive emotional engagement rather than avoidance. For instance, imagine a person who denies or runs away from feeling sorrowful about a family member's death. Perhaps she or he throws herself into work or socialization as a means to alleviate the pain over time. For a Stoic, he or she would take some time sitting with sadness and reflecting on what makes them feel sad. There they would recognize that an emotion is a part of losing a family member, but could not call it weakness, but instead a time for practicing acceptance and strength. Another technique inspired by Stoicism is journaling. Writing down thoughts and feelings helps externalize emotions, making them easier to analyze and manage. Marcus Aurelius himself used journaling as a tool for self-reflection, capturing his struggles and insights to better understand his inner world. Suppression of emotions would sound like a recipe for gaining control, yet the effect is usually counterproductive. Through the Stoic exercise of acknowledgement, reflection, and redirection, we turn emotional suppression on its head and transform emotional suppression into emotional mastery. Thus, it not only enhances our resilience, but above all, deepens our knowledge of ourselves towards living life in greater harmony and satisfaction. It may cause a great deal of disconnection from one's values and purpose in life. Without self-reflection, we tend to drift through life and react to circumstances without ever knowing the deeper motivations behind our actions. This makes us unfulfilled most of the time because we lose touch with the principles that give our lives meaning. Self-reflection is a process of introspection in which we examine our thoughts, actions, and decisions to ensure they align with our values. If not, we risk being swept away by external influences and chasing goals that might not resonate with our true selves. This can result in feelings of confusion, dissatisfaction, and lack of direction over time. The Stoics taught the necessity of frequent self-reflection for maintaining this harmony. For example, Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, frequently discussed the role of introspection. At the end of every day, he would review and reflect on his thoughts and actions to ensure that they were in harmony with his virtues. This is not a form of self-deprecation, but rather an action for personal growth and reflection. Seneca also encouraged daily introspection. He compared this practice to a merchant examining their accounts. It's essential to be balanced and to avoid mistakes. With regard to our actions, by checking our actions, we could find the areas wherein we did not live in line with our values, then deliberately strive to become better. Incorporating self-reflection does not have to be complicated rituals or hours of meditation. It can be merely setting aside a few minutes every day to ask such meaningful questions as, was what I did today reflective of my values? Was I patient and wise in the face of my challenges? What could I do differently tomorrow? One practical method is maintaining a reflection journal. At the end of each day, record experiences, emotions, and decisions. This helps one to externalize his or her thoughts, thus finding it easier to look at patterns and areas of development. Over time, such habits deepen self-awareness and strengthen the bond between an individual and his values. Another method is to pause and reflect at intervals throughout the day. If you find yourself in a situation that requires a decision or emotional response, pause and ask yourself if your reaction aligns with your values. This simple act of mindfulness can prevent impulsive action and keep you anchored to your values. Lack of self-reflection isn't just a missed opportunity for growth, it's actually a barrier to living a fulfilling life. Embracing the Stoic practice of daily self-assessment and incorporating simple reflective habits can reconnect one to values, intentional choice-making, and a purposeful, harmonious life. It's a common trap that people fall into, over-relying on external validation. In the world where likes, comments, and praise have become measures of success, one easily forgets their own worth and finds self-esteem in the eyes of others. This quest for continuous validation can be a very fragile sense of self, since one bases one's identity on external things that they cannot control. If I rely on others to approve of me, then my emotional security is at their mercy, and I become dependent on how they perceive me to enjoy myself. This creates external validation, which creates more stress than peace, as you are chasing after the next compliment, accolade, or recognition. In a nutshell, you'll feel less peaceful because your identity is dependent on what the people around you say about you. Epictetus, one of the most prominent Stoic philosophers, taught that true self-worth comes from within, not from the approval or disapproval of others. He famously said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In this context, Epictetus emphasized that we cannot control how others perceive us, but we can control how we perceive ourselves. Our self-worth must be rooted in our own actions, principles, and integrity, not in external opinions. Epictetus also spoke to the importance of knowing what is in our control and what is not. Validating oneself on the views of others is a quintessential example of something beyond our control. People might praise or criticize us, but their opinion does not define our value. Being aware of this frees a person from constantly seeking someone else's validation and beginning to build self-confidence by one's judgments and acts. Building inner confidence by the use of Stoic principles involves embracing the ideology of self-reliance. This is not closing our doors to others, nor rebuffing feedback. Rather, it is just acknowledging that our worthiness cannot be based on anyone else. We can, for instance, set specific personal standards and goals that help us build an inner sense of fulfillment when our actions are in line with our values and principles, regardless of how others perceive these actions. The practice that aids against over-reliance on external validation is negative visualization. This means that the person imagines the loss of things or people to whom he depends for validation, be it social media followers, accolades, or even close relationships. Through this process, mentally preparing for the fact that these external sources of validation are not always going to be there helps break them from their hold over a person and helps focus inwardly on purpose and fulfillment. Lastly, gratitude for our efforts in achieving things is a powerful means of strengthening inner confidence. We do not need others to acknowledge our work when we can take pride in the effort we put into our actions. Gratitude for our own growth, regardless of external recognition, reinforces our sense of self-worth and diminishes the need for external approval. This Stoic way of building confidence is, therefore, a journey to self-reliance and inner peace. By trusting in our judgment, keeping the focus on what can be controlled, and satisfaction from our action rather than other people's validation, we can really build an inward and permanent sense of confidence that would not depend on the approval of other people. This inner strength allows us to live more authentically by our own principles and values rather than the passing approval of the world. In this video, we explored 4 subtle signs of emotional neglect and their Stoic interpretations. The first sign, constant discontent, often arises when we place too much importance on external factors. Stoicism teaches us to line our desires with what is within our control, leading to lasting contentment. The second sign, suppression of emotions, occurs when we avoid facing our feelings. Instead of suppressing them, Stoicism encourages us to acknowledge and redirect emotions constructively, using them for personal growth. The third sign, lack of self-reflection, keeps us disconnected from our values. Through daily self-assessment, we should be able to align actions with principles. Lastly, the fourth indication is having an over-reliance on external validation. External validation comes about from dependence on other people's affirmation. Epictetus goes on to teach that authentic self-worth comes within, not by other people's judgments. Emotional neglect is not an overnight process. It demands effort, self-awareness, and patience. This kind of journey toward emotional balance is gradual, but moving step by step towards identifying our emotions and keeping our values in check helps align us with a more wholesome and fulfilling life. I encourage you to take these Stoic practices on board. You can start from today and reflect on the emotional states that make you feel otherwise, identifying some of those areas in which you tend to neglect yourself, then apply the principles of Stoicism. Whichever the practice, mastering desires, facing emotions, introspection daily, or self-worth within yourself, will help you recognize your emotional needs and then live out inner peace. Remember, emotional neglect is not something to be ashamed of. It's just a sign that there's room for growth. By embracing these practices, you take the first steps toward honoring yourself and living a life guided by wisdom, resilience, and purpose. So, take action today. Start small, be patient, and trust that the path of Stoicism will lead you to a more fulfilled and emotionally balanced life.